In Pakistan, we're seeing a lot of founders that have looked at business models that have worked in other markets. May not be really developed markets like Silicon Valley, but potentially Indonesia or India markets or Vietnam markets that are just a few years ahead of us. And then adapting them for Pakistan and really looking at what works locally. What has been this kind of pattern in Vietnam? Are you seeing, and Valerie, this goes back to your point earlier about the evolution of the types of founders that we're seeing in the country as well. What have you seen in terms of business models being adopted versus homegrown innovative business models in the country? And how does that compare across different sectors? So Valerie, start with you, and then Jonas will come to you on that same question.
Yeah, before I answer that, I want to emphasize that there's nothing wrong with copy or, learning from other business model that already proved success somewhere else. Like, why we have to invent something new when there's already like a working model in similar country, similar like emerging countries such as like India, China, Indonesia, and then apply that to Vietnam. So I don't think it's necessary to like we have to invent new business model. Like I really welcome startups to learn from the mistakes and also the success of like prior startups that prove themselves in other emerging markets that are quite similar to Vietnam already, especially China, India, and Indonesia. So with that being said, I would say Vietnamese founders are really fast at adapting, really fast as bringing back this kind of global ambition, global unicorns and global business model back to Vietnam, and then adapting it to the country. So whether it's FMCG, B2B marketplace, or payment gateway, or buy now pay later, health tech. You can see all of that in Vietnam right now. And I think the second point of your question is what's being funded the most. I think the top two industry right now is still, first of all, e-commerce, because of the rising consumer middle class in Vietnam. If you look at the statistic, by 2025, digital economy and e-commerce, digital economy will be bigger, but e-commerce market size by 2025 is going to be 40 billion in Vietnam alone. So e-commerce is really driving the digital economy transformations. And the second largest industry and sector is fintech, especially consumer fintech, and then after going hand to hand with MSMEs and SME fintechs, because every time you make a transaction online, you also make a transaction in fintech. So like whether it's like payments or money transfer, right? So fintech and e-commerce go really hands in hand. So I really believe in those two sectors will be the main driver of digital economy in Vietnam in the next like at least 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, no, it's great. I will dig into that a little bit more. Jonas, any thoughts on business models before we come back to the sector point that Valerie made in the second part of her answer?
Yeah, so I've got a funny story maybe to share as an example of Vietnamese entrepreneurialism. As I was mentioning, we actually used to work very closely with 7-Eleven, and for the US folks on the call, 7-Eleven obviously is a huge old brand in the US, but the first store only opened in Vietnam actually in 2017 on the 30th of June. And I was at the store opening, so we built all tech for them. So they built a tech system from scratch because the whole hypothesis was great tech talent and it's all about information systems, modern retail. We launched this store that morning at 6 a.m. was soft opening, 8 a.m. was grand launch. That afternoon, there was a guy on Facebook selling 7-Eleven delivery. Somebody had within the same day decided, I'm going to do quick commerce and I'm just going to be selling. And he literally had some guy show up at the store and was selling e-commerce what the store a few hours ago had just opened up as an unofficial, totally, of course, unaffiliated. But the good side of the Vietnamese ecosystem is I've never seen a country where a lot of ecosystems claim they hustle, but nobody hustles harder than Vietnam. The downside of that, however, is also with a lot of these business models that there seem to be very massive hype and trend cycles where you don't have one guy then who starts selling quick commerce. You'll suddenly have 20 people pop up in the next 2 months, because part of the hustle and the entrepreneurial spirit is also the belief, if that idiot can do it, I can do this much better. So the moment you see something, you have 20 people doing the same thing, but then within 6 months, the whole thing collapses and it's off to the next trend. So I do think there is, one of the strengths is this hustle. And we've seen the same thing in Pakistan in the last maybe 18, 24 months as well, where you have interesting business models from overseas being tried out. Then you have suddenly 20 players doing the same thing. You have a bit of a potential risk that they all go after the low-hanging fruit and kill each other, but nobody actually manages to reach critical mass and stick at it over time, because at the end of the day, whether it is 5, 8, 10 years, it's big companies aren't built in 1, 2 years. It takes that long-term grit. But definitely this kind of inspiration from other markets and this hype cycle is very, very real across both ecosystems, I'd say.